Erin Sullivan has been a consultant astrologer, author and teacher since the late 1960s. Widely travelled, she has lectured on and taught astrology across the world and has numerous publishing and editorial credits to her name. She has also written books on retrograde planets and the fascinating subject of astrocartography. In 1990, she published Saturn in Transit, Boundaries of Mind, Body and Soul. And it's this planet which is the main theme in today's interview. Erin, good evening.
Oh, good evening, James. This is great.
It's lovely to be talking to you.
Yeah, it's really nice to talk to you, and I'm very excited about having a look at Raphael's Ephemeris and how in depth it is. But I know we're going to talk about a few things before that. And why don't we just go ahead? I mean, I'm yours.
Why don't you tell us a few things about yourself and what you're doing in astrology at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I have a clientele that's universal. So I have my client work, and and that's like, to me, I don't know, that is what to me astrology is, as far as one of the best ways of really supporting, helping people through their various crises, but also getting to the core of what might be a complex or an issue or a problem. Or if they want to move, that's where the astrocartography relocation comes in. And it's really interesting that more people right now, I'm getting more and more requests for astrocartography and relocation right now, sort of October, the autumn of 2013. And I find that very interesting because people, maybe it's because of retirement age and so on, because it's interesting because they're very knowledgeable about the astrology.
Yeah.
Most of my clients do speak the language to some degree, which I really like. So, people who are in practice consult with me as well. And but right now, my main sort of angst is writing. I mean, I love writing, obviously, from my books. And I just love words, and I always have since I was a child. And even as a child, I thought magically. And as I became more conscious and aware of, the solar system, my dad was really helpful with that because he didn't have any idea I was going to be an astrologer. That would have killed him. In fact, it did. Or killed his relationship with me.
Yeah.
So, I had this instinctive relationship with symbols and signs, and I was forever kind of, I guess I'd be what's called a hermeneutic person. I interpret things. I can't look at anything without seeing what it might mean underneath. Part of that comes, I think, out of my background, where, and I, being raised in the 50s, because I was born in 1947. I saw a lot of activity and relating in the way people were in those days, and I knew that it wasn't true. I knew there was more going on under the surface.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. I was 6 years old when I realized that. By the time I was 16, I'd come across something that I think all of us astrologers in my age bracket turned to, was Margaret Hone's Complete Astrology. And from that book, I taught myself how to set horoscopes. And it was like 14 steps to the sidereal time. It was mad. And so I figured out a way to do it in 4 steps, because I have a really good mind for this kind of thing. I mean, I never did get out of Math 9 in school, but by the time, they let me into a program that taught me how to type, the only positive and real thing I learned in high school. And so what this has led up to, just to cut to the chase, is that right now I am working on an article for Archive, which is the Journal for the California Institute of Integral Studies. And the article is on Marie Curie and her work, her life, her horoscope, which is astounding. And I hope it to become a book that people will be able to read and kind of skim over the astrology, like Family Dynamics. A lot of people read Family Dynamics. They know nothing about astrology, and they get the book. They get it. So the book that I hope to write from this would be, Marie Curie, and the Manhattan Project, because she leads right up into what happened not far from me in Alamogordo. Was the first test in July the 16th of 1945. And that whole Manhattan Project is really fascinating. All of the horoscopes of the events and the people involved are directly linked to her. And it's absolutely gripping. How to present this is becoming a bit of a problem, because I'm writing for an academic journal, and I am a storyteller. So I'm a magical and critical thinker, and that's like one of my topics that I like to speak on. And we'll be doing so at the next ESAR conference in September of 2014. And also, I'm in the middle of reprinting 2 of my books, which thankfully are, I know it sounds awful, going out of print. One is out of print, and that's the Venus and Jupiter, Bridging the Ideal and the Real. And the next one will be my book on astrocartography and relocation, which is already been dropped in price. And by the time I get it printed, it's going to be absolutely purchasable, because £40 in the United States is, a lot. $40 is a lot of money for a book. So I'm looking forward to doing those kinds of things. So I'm kind of, really looking at time and money, money being primary to do this. Yeah, so basically that's what I'm up to.
Right, great. How do other people react normally, when they find out you're an astrologer, do they...
That's changed a lot. It's really changed. No, it's really changed. It's very positive. Because I started so soon and I was practicing in 73, which a lot of my equal colleagues were as well.
Yeah.
Like Rob Hand wrote a book in 1976. It's just in those early days he was working on books. And so in those days, if I went, say, to an unknown group or a party or something like that, I wouldn't tell people I was an astrologer. I wouldn't tell them, because it's one of the fastest ways to clear a room or have people turn away and start wanting to chat with other people.
Yeah.
And that was then, and that went on for a long time, and I had a real identity crisis about, my work. And in my midlife, it was quite a phenomenal arrangement of planets and progressions and, half year in a cycle, my midlife transition. I thought, I went through a big crisis about astrology, because I felt that I had reached a place where I couldn't go any further. And there's nothing more terrifying than having devoted your life, your entire vocation, your mind, your soul, your body to something that, really is phenomenally significant and important in the consciousness of the human race.
Yeah, sure.
And so I went for a long time not doing that until, probably maybe in the late 70s, I actually printed cards that said my name, Astrologer, on it. And I was like, oh my God, I've actually made a statement. But I do have 4 years behind me of classics. And so I began, it was like I went to the university. I thought, well, I'll take astronomy, which I did, of course, in solar system astronomy and also mainstream stars, main sequence star patterns. And then I thought, well, I love science, but I'm not really just a scientist. And then I fell into the classics department library. And I knew instantly the answer that I had in my head was here in this library, and that I was determined to find it. So I registered for a full-time classics degree, majoring in Latin. And that changed my entire perspective, and it gave me what I needed to jump across a threshold in my own work. And everything I do learn or read has always got an astrological backdrop. Sometimes, especially these days, I feel like Christiane Amanpour, standing with the entire zodiac behind me and the Uranus-Pluto square, sort of, exploding and bombing and carrying on all behind me. And but in those days, hey, it was the highlight. I mean, the 80s was the great decade for astrology, and in the 90s was a very intelligent decade for astrology. But the 80s was the revolution. We really had to fight society. We had to fight as a unit. And I did not have any problem at that stage telling people, after 20 years of studying, that I was an astrologer, that I taught people about themselves, their souls, their relationship with the world, using the solar system as a model. And people were interested. They were interested. Yeah. They weren't weirded out. And so it has been to me, because the times have changed, and I was afraid to tell people. I wasn't the only one, but I am a vocated astrologer, and that's my main work. But everything else, like classics and Jungian analysis studies, my work with the cosmology, are all woven into my work. And so when I find out that, because I'm my entire livelihood and work is invested and centered in the world of astrology, I've found it to be the best way of working with the human psyche and life and its complexes, as well as the global condition and how we as individuals actually individuate or, become part of the collective and can really advance ourselves. So astrology sort of like now fascinates people. I mean, my neighbors go, "Oh, you're an astrologer. What a gift!" And I'm going, "Really? I wouldn't have told you this 25 years ago." And the subject, itself, which is preferable to me, about their own astrology, they often ask. A friend asked me in pottery, I do micaceous pottery also for a living. Yeah. Asked me, "Why have all my pots cracked this year?" And she's a really good potter. And I said, I have to be really frank, and this isn't a solicitation, but I can't tell you that unless I look at your actual natal horoscope so that I can see why you might be going through a period of discouragement, in your work. So the good news, and the final line on that one, is that astrology is no longer weird or an unacceptable occupation, thanks to really good astrologers, and also the acceptance of astrology through higher levels of education, including doctorates and PhDs that a few of our colleagues have started, and in fact carry legitimate theses in astrology. So we can thank a lot of people of my age for that, and 45-year-old people are sort of really pleased that they have something that they can actually follow, and it's wonderful to be, appreciated and respected for that.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say, how would you answer the question? I mean, it's been thrown my way by various skeptics. I mean, everyone wants to know how it works. If astrology works, they say, well, how does it work?
It's kind of a hard question to ask.
I think, I mean, the answer that I have, I don't think would satisfy them, because for me it's about symbolism.
Yes, you're talking about magical thinking. In other words, looking at symbols which speak much louder. Yeah. They're archetypes. They speak much louder than 1,000 words. But you have to be able to interpret, and that's what hermeneutics means. It's from the root of hermeneutics is Hermes, the interpreter. Yeah. And the sort of other Greek root word is maieutikos, and Maia was the mother of Hermes, and maieutikos in Greek means to midwife. I mean, it was Socrates. So I kind of look at it as a way of I look at the horoscope right now. I'm looking at Marie Curie. I look for relationships between planets. Now, because I can't give you the mystical background. I don't know. I don't know how that works. Why? All I know is just the need for the younger generation to reinvent the wheel. They've got to find original work. But I'm looking at this horoscope and I'm saying, okay, there's 10 planets and classical and the nodes. And they have these angles, these geometric angles, which goes way back 2,500 years. Back to Pythagoras and to Democritus when it comes to the atomic theory and so on. So I look at the horoscope and I say, oh, there's the sun, the moon, and Uranus in a geometrical pattern called a grand trine. And to me, that tells me what kind of a conversation is going on between those symbols and what has been projected into those symbols over the years of, because from the sun to Saturn, that was it for, until the sighting of Uranus. And so I look at the horoscope as a conversation, a very active and dynamic relationship between the psyche and its contents, which is absolutely busy. I mean, you know as well as I do that we carry on these constant interior conversations, and the horoscope actually tells you what they are. But it also tells you how in time, as one ages, it takes into account a person's evolution as just as a human being, and how those archetypes, say Sun in Scorpio, Trine, Moon in Pisces, Uranus in Cancer, how those archetypes have evolved, so that you can look at a horoscope almost as a moving thing, because the planets don't screech to a halt the minute you're born, right? Mm-hmm. They instantly become transits. You instantly become invested in a future that exists already, but you don't know what it is, and you have to evolve towards it in a certain way. And and for example, in Marie Curie, her sun which is her sort of hearth fire, because the sun in Latin is focused, and the whole solar system is focused on the sun. It's our solar plexus. There's a lot of imagery around the sun and solarism, and and it actually demarcates the days. And so when I look at the moon, I'm looking at the first 27 days of that person's life, and what were the embedded, absolute, pre-verbal imagery, patterns, responses to Uranus is a new planet. It's in a trine to her sun, moon, so there's inventiveness and, a kind of foresight with Uranus as an archetype. And so each of the planets has its own, it's sort of, I tell people and insist in my classes and in my studies and my writing is that planets don't make you do anything.
Yeah.
It just isn't like that. That's really bad. Bad astrology. I look at my transits and I start freaking out about, it's going to make something happen. And I go, hang about, that's not what you teach.
That's the old view, isn't it?
It's very much the old view, and it actually works. But I love the law of astrology. I love the fact that it's so elegant, the solar system. And honestly, this sounds really hubristic, but I actually broke the code of 2,500 years of mystery around retrogrades with that book. I mean, that was my gift to astrology.
Yeah.
And I plagued everybody, in London, because I was living in St. John's Wood at the time. Every one of my astrology friends had to go through all of this with me. And I was obsessed. I wrote the book in 6 months, and I wrote it with an ephemeris. I used an ephemeris. I was flipping back and forth. I was writing notes. I was figuring out the cycles. And so as far as I'm concerned, astrology is, it really is a representation of the elegance of the solar system and how it can actually present really awkward relationships and complexes and conversations. And we're in one of those right now.
Yeah. Right. Well, you just mentioned the ephemeris. I mean,
Yes.
How important is it, given the presence of computer programs everywhere, how important is it to be able to use an ephemeris?
Absolutely necessary.
Yeah?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. Because I once had an experience in '68. I went to the Theosophical Society in Manly. Palmer Hall was giving a speech. And he's a very interesting metaphysician from the old days. And this speech he went into astrology a bit, and somebody put up their hand and said, well, what are retrograde planets? What does that R mean in the ephemeris? Because none of us had computers. We all had different kinds. A few. There was like 2 or 3 ephemerides. And what I did was I put up my hand and I said, yes, I would really like to know about that as well. And he said, it doesn't mean anything. And boy, that was like a red flag to a bull. You don't tell a Scorpio that something doesn't mean so, ever. Because I knew. So I thought, okay, back to the books. So back to the books. And I started counting, and I started looking at when planets went retrograde, when they went direct. I started writing, even in these early days, in the early 60s, or late 60s, I guess. No, early 60s. And I started to realize, my God, here's a rhythm. And so, you don't know that when you set up a horoscope off a computer. If you run off a chart from a computer, you don't know the movement. You don't know what the planets are doing. You're taking it for granted that they're actually fixed and they're there. And that you don't understand that there's a life there, that there's movement, and that it has to do with, I'm looking now at the page August 2013, which happens to be curious because August the 1st of 2013, it was 2012, when the first Uranus Pluto square really occurred. But I'm looking at the page where it has the list of the planets and longitudes.
Yeah, this is the Raphael'S, yeah?
Yeah, this is the Raphael ephemeris is probably the most informational ephemeris that I've ever seen. I used a different one. But I've always beleaguered the fact that there were no latitude and descendants because I liked it, or declinations, because planets can eclipse other planets, and it's the latitude, and the declination that determine the connection of 2 planets. So you might have, for example, Mars at 19 degrees of Cancer, and it is, and say Jupiter at sort of 10 degrees of Cancer. And if I look down the line here, I see Mars and Jupiter degrees actually. Saturn, it only gives you Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but still, it tells you if they are on the same same declination and latitude, which means that they are in line, and therefore there's an eclipse going on between those planets. And so you look at, for example, we've got Neptune and Pluto eclipsing on the 13th of August 2013, and I would never have known that if I had looked at my ephemeris.
Yeah,
I would have to go to a very good and a very excellent website to do that, and I think we all know which one that is.
And you can also use declinations if you have 2 planets which are in parallel. Can you explain?
Yes.
You can use it like a conjunction, can't you?
Yeah, the conjunctions are parallel, and there's in the opposition because you have one planet exactly the same number of degrees above the ecliptic, and then exactly the same degrees below, which is a parallel in longitude. And what you end up with is being able to determine that there is an opposition, and that could be, an eclipse. If they're in the same declination and latitude, then they are conjunct by that measurement. And that's something that a lot of people aren't really educated in, and especially our younger computer-generated astrologers. And so I insist on, as a teacher, when I teach, is do not show up to your class without an ephemeris.
Yeah.
Because we are going to use it mercilessly. And one of my sort of fun things to do in teaching, if I'm doing my training course, which I have on now for sale, is to take 3 months out of the ephemeris and give me a perfect day. And it can't be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I use the ephemeris, as I say, mercilessly. Mine is a riot. I mean, it's just like,
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah.
It's like, and it was given to me by a good friend, because it's the French version, by a good friend in 1987. And I have others. I've used the Mickelson one and so on.
Yeah. Sue Tompkins said she quite liked its portability. The single year Raphael'S. She can carry it wherever she likes and make notes or whatever.
Yes. Well, that's the first one I used. With Saturn, I really see Saturn as a multiple archetype. I have some sympathy for Saturn because he did several things that were really intense, and one of them was he castrated his father at the request of his mother, Gaia. He split heaven and earth, so he was actually responsible for what now is the Cartesian split. In other words, the heavens and the earth at that point were forever unglued, and there was no sort of Pontifex Maximus between, the earth and the heavens. So from that point on, we had this sort of incredible separation between, what I call the magical mind, the heavens, and the critical mind, the earth. And Saturn, it's evolved, because archetypes don't change. I mean, an archetype is like, if you're making a sculpture, you make your first mold. After that, it starts to become decreasingly degraded every time you pour into the mold. And if you're thinking in terms of Saturn, we're thinking in terms of a very deep part of the psyche that is the homeostatic principle. It is the planet that actually, and here I am saying planets do things, it tells you when you've gone too far. It tells you how to keep your body together. Saturn it rules the structure of the body, the bones, it rules the skin as a function. So it actually rules both the inner structure and the outer structure of everything. Okay, because that's, we are embodied, we are incarnate, we're in the flesh.
Yeah,
and exactly. So the function of Saturn as an archetype, as a Titan, was really unpleasant because he ate his own children for fear of being taken over. There was a huge war in which he was, played a great role in, was sort of sent off to Hades and then given a special place in it. And so that gives him that archetype. He becomes both a mother by gestating his own children, a kind of surrogate mother, but he's also the destroyer of the marriage of heaven and earth. And so I almost feel that the planet Saturn has to do with us being able to find a place of stability, to undergo a major step out of our historical past. In other words, if I'm having Saturn going over my Mercury, then I have yet to face again, after 29 years, again I have to face another high-level questioning of my historical way of thinking. And I have to break through to that other side. And so it's very important to recognize that Saturn is both the jailer, but also the deliverer of creative issue.
I wanted also to talk about the Saturn cycle in general. How you've got the it goes sort of 14, 28 you get the Saturn return, but it can be broken down, can't it, into the square and the opposition and then the next square.
Well, isn't that the structuring of our natural lives? Even if we didn't know that Saturn existed, we still know that at 6.5 to 7.5 is first departure from home. And it's when we go out into the world and see other people's ways of living, and we begin to regard our own life either in a very positive way or in a way which realizes, my God, they have a much better home than I do. They also have to deal with authority that's external to the parental matrix, the family matrix, in a way which is highly formative at the age of 7.5, so that, they're away from home. They have to be very brave, they have to be very strong. And then by the time Saturn moves along to what I call the midlife of adolescence, that's when authority starts to become really important, because what happens is an adolescent is got his own or her own, sense at this stage of authority and how it is internalized and what they think is what authority should be.
Yeah.
And there is the rub, because they are constantly facing their opposition. In other words, the conversation, if you will, is a direct conversation between the old Saturn, in other words, birth structure, and domestic home life structure, creative structure. Suddenly they have to face their development and their structural world. And generally it's, it brings out the dark side in kids. I know that because I have a very sunny, beautiful, amazing granddaughter. I have several grandkids. And she says, I do have my dark side, And I said, so of course you do, but how does yours work? And she's just 14, so she's coming into that. So she told me about that. And, and then when we get into 21, with this first Saturn, the second Saturn square, but in a formative one towards a conjunction at 29, people at that age, 21, 22, some of them are in university, some of them are not. But they come into a critical phase where they think they know everything, but they don't. Now, the problem with this age is it is dangerous because, that adolescence, I have also written in my Saturn book the story of Icarus and Persephone, who knew everything and got severely, punished for it. Yeah. But by 21, you're supposed to be grown up. You can drink, you can kill people, you can do all sorts of stuff. But you aren't really mature until you hit the 29.
I've heard the 21 supposed milestone described as the illusion of maturity.
That's it. Not only the illusion of the 21-year-old, but of others, and they expect from them that doesn't exist yet in their psyches.
Yeah, sure.
Which is why drug taking from the age of 16 to 25 is absolutely. I'm not against sort of weed or whatever, but I am against the destruction of the neuronal. It is the most active time in the brain of developing, the prefrontal cortex, the capacity for decision making. Teenagers don't have that. It's like Icarus said. His father said, "Don't fly too close to the sun, or these wax wings will melt." And he says, "Oh, they'll be fine, they'll be fine." The next thing you know, he's plunging into the Aegean Sea. Persephone's mom tells her, "Don't go, at recess and wander off by yourself. Stay with your friends." She wanders off by herself, and what do you know? Up comes Hades, and down she goes.
Yep.
And the mother is freaking out. She should, as I would. Okay, so adolescence is this, I'm going to fight the system. I know what I'm doing. 21 is, I sort of know what I'm doing, and I am an adult because I am allowed to do all these things. However, I really can't, and that it takes around 25, about 25-ish to, consolidate. It's the threshold toward adulthood, but we are not really adults until 28 to 29.
I was just going to say, you only realise that when you get there. And you look back at 21 and you think, no, I wasn't grown up at all, really.
Yeah. Life-making decisions at that point are very, very important. The 29-year-old threshold is very significant because it does have to do with the crossover from being a child of a mother and father to being a person with a family. And so there's a struggle at that threshold, as there is at every threshold crossing, a struggle of the hero, if you will, because I've written a book and also a personal report on the heroic journey. The issue with reaching that age is that sometimes there's a lot of pain in the past, and it comes back full force. Sometimes there's some, not everybody comes out of a drastic, catastrophic home, but there's always something. Like the mother might say, "Oh, that's such a beautiful dress on you. Too bad that you're too fat." I mean, that's a real backhanded compliment. So there can be a lot of minor little neuroses and complexes around which we have built that begin to shatter at 29 and a half. And so that's when we grow up. That's when we have to leave the family and become an adult, and we begin our real journey toward, the midlife, which is basically a 20-year-long phase. It's not just a big sort of 2 or 3 year crisis, and it isn't a crisis.
I mean, you kind of discover what if there is some awful loss at the time. It's something that you need to let go of, because you it's crystallization, isn't it? Things come together, and you find out what's really working in your life, and also what isn't working.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true. The numbers of people, for instance, who have divorces is very high at 29. Yeah. The numbers of people, I come out of the world where I did light shows for the major bands of the UK and United States. A lot of people died, at 18, but there's 18, 19, but the majority of deaths that occur are around 29. It's really interesting. It's as if you couldn't cross the threshold.
Yeah.
And it could be a car accident. There's many ways, but there isn't a statistic, and I can't quote it right now, but that's the critical aspect, is that there are an unusual number of deaths at 28 to 29. I mean, especially sort of movie stars and so on. You'll notice it.
Yeah. Still with Saturn, what's the best way of handling a Saturn transit? What should we be looking for? I mean, when we look inside ourselves, should we be slowing down, taking stock, and just sort of watching and waiting, as it were?
Yes, because absolutely, we have to respect the origins of the symbol. And the origins of the symbol are this whole business of eating our own creativity and then giving birth to it, and reconstructing the world. It's also a symbol of, it's very significant time of let's say, choice repression, where you look at where you are and how you may need absolutely to jump the threshold in order to mature more, change your attitude, how you have structured your entire life, which is why the heroic journey is such a good model, because it actually times in your personal chart Saturn going over the angles and through the houses, which, actually chronology is really important in our lives. What happened at critical ages is going to happen again 29 years ago, only with a different context. So it's a Saturnian situation of people standing in authority who may not actually be authentic, because the word authority is to do with authenticity, authorship, our authority figures and so on. So we have to find our authenticity, real authenticity, while we get a Saturn transit, and it lasts for quite a long time. The outcome. So we want to make sure that we really do it well.
Yeah. Anyway, we're out of time. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I would just like to say thank you very much indeed, Erin Sullivan. Is there anything that you want to add at the end here?
I would say that it is the Pontifex Maximus, And that is the word that's given to the Pope, which is absolutely and utterly ridiculous.
The Great Bridge.
It's the Great Bridge, and astrology is the bridge between heaven and earth. And that is what, to me, is the most significant part, is how are we, earthlings, connected to our cosmic reflections. So it is the bridge, the Pontifex Maximus.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
It's been really nice to talk to you, and thank you. And I think the Raphael Ephemeris has a lot more happening. It's got all the lunar aspects to the planets. It has a lot of information that many of them don't. And the last thing, my last word is, don't come to my class without an ephemeris.
Marvellous. Great of you to say so. Thanks, Erin Sullivan. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Great stuff.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.